Hello and welcome to my channel. So today's video is going to be all about the false Margaret. So who was Margaret? Margaret was the granddaughter of King Alexander III of Scotland, and she was Queen of Scotland from the 19th of March 1286 to September 1290. Though historians actually dispute that she was queen, but I say she was queen, same as Empress Matilda and Lady Jane Grey being queens of England. Now, some people say that they weren't actually queens because they weren't crowned or anointed, but King Edward V and King Edward VIII weren't crowned or anointed either, and they're still considered kings. But anyway, back to Margaret. Margaret was born in either March or April in 1283. Her father was King Eric II of Norway, and her mother was Margaret of Scotland, the daughter of Alexander III. Margaret's mother sadly died shortly after her birth. So towards the end of her grandfather Alexander III of Scotland's reign, Margaret was considered heir presumptive. But then Alexander's wife Yolanda fell pregnant, but Alexander sadly died before the child was born. He had set out in stormy weather on his horse to go and see Yolanda, but he was found dead the next day from a broken neck. Yolanda went into labour, but sadly the child was stillborn. So Margaret became Queen of Scotland when she was just 3 years old, but she still lived in Norway. 6 regents, known as Guardians of Scotland, were appointed to govern the country until Margaret was able to come over. But then there was a dispute in Parliament involving Robert Bruce, 5th Lord of Annandale, and John Balliol, Lord of Galloway. This was probably due to the fact that both of them were in line to the throne, and Robert Bruce may have not wanted Margaret to become queen. Bjarne Erlingsson, King Eric's counsellor, arrived in Scotland to claim the throne for Margaret. But Robert Bruce raised a rebellion, but he was defeated in early 1287. Now, because of all of this, King Eric was reluctant to send Margaret over to Scotland. But in 1290, he changed his mind and decided that Margaret was now able to travel over. In August 1290, Margaret set sail to travel to Scotland, but during her voyage she became ill. The ship landed in Orkney, which at the time belonged to Norway, around the 23rd of September. And sadly, Margaret died on the island sometime between the 26th and the 29th of September 1290. Her body was returned to Norway, where King Eric insisted that the coffin was opened so that he could confirm his daughter's identity. She was then buried in the north wall of the chancel of Christchurch. King Eric died 9 years later, and he was succeeded by his brother, who became Håkon V. In 1300, a woman arrived in Norway. She had arrived on a ship from Germany, and she had something shocking to say. This woman claimed that she was Queen Margaret. She said that she had not died on Orkney, but she had been sold by Tor Håkonsson's wife Ingeborg and been sent to Germany, where she married. Now, Tor Håkonsson and his wife were actually on the ship that was taking Margaret to Scotland. Ingeborg was Margaret's principal lady-in-waiting. Now, as well as saying she had been sold by Ingeborg, Margaret also accused many other people of treason. Now, even though King Eric had opened his daughter's coffin and confirmed her identity, and the fact that the woman appeared to be 40 years old instead of the 17 years old Margaret would have been, many people supported her, and also members of the clergy supported her. But luckily it was determined that this woman was not Queen Margaret, and she was actually burnt at the stake for treason in 1301. The woman's husband was also beheaded, and then the woman became known as the False Margaret. But why would this woman claim to be the dead queen? It has been suggested that the woman may have been used by a Norwegian nobleman as a plot against King Håkon. Now, even though it had been determined that this woman was not the real Queen Margaret, the story of the betrayed princess spread in Norway and Scotland in the form of ballads. And some years later, a small church called St Margaret's Church was built near the False Margaret's execution site. It became the centre of a local martyr cult and was frowned upon by the authorities. But this church no longer doesn't exist. So that's the story of the false Margaret, the woman who claimed to be the dead Queen Margaret of Scotland. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.